This is the story of a company that ruled 3 continents and then lost everything. Not a country, not an empire. A company. A company so powerful it conquered the strongest empire of that era. At its peak, it commanded its own army. 260,000 soldiers, twice the size of the British military at the time. It printed its own currency, fought its own wars, taxed its own people. It didn't work for a government. Governments worked for it. It's actually hard to believe, but it controlled the lives of over 400 million people. That is more than the entire population of Europe at the time. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't negotiate. It decided. And the most terrifying part, this company started with just a piece of paper and a room full of merchants who just wanted to make money. Now here's what nobody tells you. At the very moment this entity stood at the top of the world, controlling geopolitics, bending governments, and waging war against countries. This was at its peak, but the cracks were already there. Not from the outside, from the inside. The ruler of this company forgot why they actually came. Their only job is to trade and transport. But after some time, they had grown so powerful, they started behaving like a monarch. But after all these years, this company only appears in history textbooks. So how did a trading company become emperor of that era? And how does something this powerful, this untouchable, vanish completely? The answer is not what you think. And every single warning sign they ignored? Someone is ignoring them right now. This is not just a story, but a lesson every new founder needs to hear before they make the same fatal mistakes. And if you're building something right now, this is your moment. Smash that like button if this story just saved you from a mistake you didn't even know you were making. Share this with the person who is about to sign a lease, hire their first employee, or bet everything on a dream. And subscribe right now because the next fallen giant is already making the same fatal error. In 1600, a merchant sat in a London counting house, staring at a ledger that told an implausible story. Ships returning from the east were carrying pepper, silk, and nutmeg, and the profits were larger than the English crown's annual treasury. But there was a catch, a fatal one. Spain and Portugal had already claimed the sea. They had the maps, the routes, the cannons, and they were burning alive any captain who tried to follow them. But this man was not a soldier. He was a bookkeeper, a man named Sir Thomas Smythe, who weighed cloth and counted coins. And yet, he was about to do something that would reshape the world. He gathered 218 London merchants, pooled their money, and made a request that had never been made before. A royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I, exclusive rights to trade with the East, one company, one flag, zero competition. On December 31st, 1600, the East India Company was born. But birth and survival are not the same thing. Their first voyage left England in 1601. Instead of fighting Portugal for the Spice Islands, Smythe looked at a map no one else was studying, a port on the western coast of India that the Portuguese ignored because it had no spices. But Smythe saw something the Portuguese missed. He sent a rough, relentless sailor named Captain William Hawkins to Surat with a mission: negotiate with the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. Hawkins didn't speak Hindi, didn't understand Persian court etiquette, didn't have an army. He had English wool and 2 years of persistence. And here's the first mystery of this story. Why did the most powerful emperor in the world, a man who ruled 100 million people, agree to trade with a nobody from a rainy island? The answer is not what you think. Jahangir didn't need English wool. He didn't care about English ships. What he needed was something invisible, something Smythe's company could provide better than Portugal, better than Spain, better than anyone. Reliability. The Portuguese cheated him. The Dutch overcharged him. The English kept their word. They showed up when they said they would. They paid what they promised. They asked for trade, not tribute. In 1608, Hawkins secured the company's first trade agreement in India, a tiny deal, a few bolts of cloth, some indigo, a handful of spices. But that tiny deal opened a door no European had walked through before. By 1612, the company built its first permanent factory in Surat. But here's what the history books won't tell you. It wasn't a workshop. It was a fortress with a ledger, and the Mughals let them build it. Because by then, the East India Company had already learned the oldest trick in empire building. Make yourself so useful that they can't afford to say no. By 1615, they sent Sir Thomas Roe as ambassador to the Mughal court. Roe didn't bring guns. He brought gifts, patience, and a 20-year vision that no European trader had shown before. The Mughals granted the company trading rights across Bengal, Bihar, and the Coromandel coast, not because they feared England, because the company made themselves indispensable. But here is the shock that no one saw coming. The company didn't just want to trade in India, they wanted to conquer India. And the tool they would use to do it was already in their hands. They just didn't know it yet. Right now, someone is watching this with a sketch in their drawer that they are too afraid to show. If that is you, hit the like button. Not for me. For the version of you that is still waiting for permission. And subscribe, because the next part is where the merchants become soldiers, and where the first innocent deal becomes a blood contract. But before they become an empire, they have to learn the most dangerous lesson of all. That trust, once earned, can be weaponized. In 1612, the company built its first permanent factory in Surat. But actually, it was a counting house with cannons, and the Mughals let them build it, because they proved themselves to be necessary for them. But being useful is not the same as being powerful. And the company was about to discover a shortcut that would turn a trading post into an empire overnight. The year is 1756. Bengal, the richest province in India, producing more silk, opium, and saltpeter than all of Europe combined. The ruler is Siraj-ud-Dowlah, a young, arrogant Nawab who distrusts the British and moves to expel them. The company's local chief, a man named Robert Clive, receives an order: defend the factory at all costs. But Clive has a problem. His army is 900 European soldiers and 2,000 Indian sepoys, poorly trained, poorly paid, and outnumbered 10 to 1. So how does a corporate clerk with 3,000 men defeat a sovereign ruler with 50,000? The answer is not on the battlefield. Clive does something that no military textbook teaches. He buys the enemy's general. Mir Jafar, Siraj's most powerful commander, is offered a deal. Betray your Nawab, and we will make you the new ruler of Bengal. £2.3 million in today's money, paid not by the British government, but by the East India Company's shareholders. On June 23, 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar holds his army back. Siraj is captured and executed, and the East India Company, a business, installs its own puppet on the throne of Bengal. But here is the shock that rewrote the rules of power. The company didn't just win a battle, they invented a new kind of war. One where corporations didn't fight governments. They replaced them. Within months, Mir Jafar is bankrupting Bengal to pay his debts to the company. Taxes triple. Famine spreads. And the East India Company, a stock-quoted firm, becomes the de facto ruler of 20 million people. By 1765, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II signs the Treaty of Allahabad. He grants the company the right to collect taxes across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. A trading company with a boardroom in London is now collecting taxes from 1/3 of India. They have diplomatic immunity. They have their own courts. They have the power to execute Indian subjects without trial. And here's the mystery that should terrify every founder watching this. How did a business with 900 soldiers become the government of 30 million people in just 8 years? The answer is leverage and finance. The company didn't conquer India with cannons. They conquered it with debt. Every puppet ruler they installed owed them money. And debt, unlike armies, never sleeps. It compounds, it enslaves, and it turns kings into employees. By 1773, the company is losing control of its own monster. The cost of running an empire is bankrupting the balance sheet. Shareholders in London are screaming for dividends while Indian famines are killing millions. The British government, embarrassed, alarmed, and outmaneuvered, passes the Regulating Act, the first time a sovereign parliament tries to restrain a corporation. But the company has already learned the second dangerous lesson. Once you become the government, no government can control you. Right now, someone is building something that is growing faster than they can control. If that is you, hit the like button. Not for me. For the version of you that still thinks bigger is always better. And subscribe, because the next part is where the giant stops looking down and starts looking in the mirror. But before the fall, the peak believes its own legend, and that is the most expensive mistake in the business world. By 1800, the East India Company had become something no business had ever been before. They controlled 1/5 of the world's population. Their private army had 260,000 soldiers, double the size of Britain's own military. Their flag flies from Cape Town to Canton. Their annual revenue exceeds £20 million, more than the entire budget of the British Crown. They monopolize the opium trade with China, fix the price of tea in London, and decide who lives and who starves across an entire subcontinent. But here's the reveal that the boardroom in London refuses to see. They are no longer running a company. They are running a civilization, and they are terrible at it. The company that came to India to trade has become the empire itself, and empires do not trade. They extract. The peak moment comes in 1813. The company's charter is up for renewal in Parliament. For 213 years, they have enjoyed a legal monopoly on trade with India. It controlled the entire trade and supply from India to any other nation, and India was known as a golden sparrow at that time because of its unmatched wealth, flourishing trade, and abundant resources from ancient times up to the medieval era, and the East India Company established its own kingdom. No British competitor can enter. No rival ship can dock. It is the most profitable protection racket in history. But this time, something is different. Industrialists in Manchester and Birmingham are screaming for access to Indian markets. Missionaries are demanding the right to preach, something the company has banned for 2 centuries because religion disrupts commerce. And the British public, for the first time, is hearing about famines, massacres, and corporate greed on a scale that shames the nation. Parliament strikes a deal. The company keeps its political power in India, but it loses its trade monopoly. And here's the shock that rewrites everything. The East India Company just became a government with no business. For 200 years, they were a trading firm that happened to rule. Now, they are a ruling firm that happens to trade. And the difference is not semantic. It is existential. A business makes profit. A government makes stability. A business cuts costs. A government feeds people. A business answers to shareholders. A government answers to history. The company is trying to be both, and it is failing at both. By 1833, the final blow falls. Parliament passes the Charter Act, stripping the company of all commercial functions. They can no longer trade tea. They can no longer ship opium. They can no longer do the very thing they were built to do, make money. They are now purely an administrative body, a corporate government running an empire they no longer own, for a nation that distrusts them, and for a population that hates them. And here's the mystery that should haunt every founder. How do you fall from the peak when you are still standing on it? The answer is invisible decay. The company doesn't collapse from an attack. It rots from the inside, slowly, quietly, while the stock price still looks good. They stop innovating because they monopolize the market. They stop listening because they replace the customer. And the system, like all systems built on extraction, is eating itself alive. By 1856, the company makes a catastrophic miscalculation. They annex the kingdom of Awadh, a wealthy, stable ally of 200 years, on the flimsiest legal pretext. The official reason, misgovernance. The real reason, the company's treasury is empty and they need Awadh's revenue to pay their own soldiers. But here is the surprise no one in London anticipated. The soldiers refused to bite the hand that just fed them by feeding them lies. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion erupts. Sepoys, the company's own Indian soldiers, turn their guns on their officers. Civilians join them. Princes join them. For one terrifying year, the company loses control of half its empire. The British Crown intervenes, not to save the company, to replace it. In 1858, the Government of India Act is passed. The East India Company is stripped of all political authority. India is transferred directly to the British Crown. The company that ruled a subcontinent is now reduced to managing tea estates and collecting pensions. And here is the final reveal of the peak. They didn't fall because they failed. They fell because they succeeded too completely. They became so powerful that power itself became their product. And when your product is control, your customer is fear. Right now, someone is scaling so fast they can't see the cracks in their own foundation. If that is you, hit the like button, not for me. For the version of you that still thinks too big to fail is a business strategy. And subscribe, because the next part is where the giant learns the most expensive lesson in history. That the peak is not the destination. It is the point where gravity starts pulling harder. They just didn't feel it yet. In 1858, the British Crown takes India away from the East India Company. But here is the reveal that history almost forgot. The company doesn't die. It pretends to live. Stripped of its army, its government, its reason to exist, it rebrands. It becomes a holding company. It manages tea plantations in Assam. It runs railways in the Punjab. It collects rents from estates it no longer understands. It is a ghost wearing a business suit, and the suit is still pressed. But ghosts don't make decisions. and the company is about to make the worst one in its 258-year history. The year is 1869. A man named Sir John Lawrence, former Viceroy of India, now a company director, proposes a bold new strategy. The company will pivot to finance. It will become a bank. It will lend money to Indian princes, British settlers, and anyone desperate enough to pay 20% interest. Here's the mystery. Why would a company that lost an empire think it could run a bank? The answer is ego dressed as experience. They had ruled millions. Surely they could manage a ledger. But ruling and banking are not cousins. They are strangers. One relies on force, the other relies on trust. And the East India Company had spent 2 centuries proving it could not be trusted. By 1871, the company's banking arm is bleeding cash. Loans to Indian princes default because the princes have no income. The company itself destroyed their tax base. Loans to British settlers default because the settlers gambled on land speculation and lost. The company's reserve fund, the last real money it has, evaporates. And here's the shock that no board meeting could soften. The East India Company is insolvent. Again. But this time, there is no empire to save it. In 1873, the company makes a desperate final play. It petitions Parliament for a new charter. It promises to reform, to modernize, to become, in its own words, a model of corporate virtue. Parliament laughs at them, not metaphorically, literally. The London Times reports that MPs greeted the petition with prolonged hilarity. A company that once dictated terms to kings is now a punchline in the House of Commons. And here's the surprise that should freeze every founder watching. The company doesn't fail because it runs out of money. It fails because it runs out of relevance. In 1874, the East India Stock Dividend Redemption Act is passed. The company is formally dissolved. Its stock, once the most valuable on the London Exchange, is redeemed for pennies. Its name is removed from the Registry of Companies. Its archives are boxed and forgotten. Its 274-year existence ends not with a crash, but with a clerk's signature. But the real disease, the root cause, was never about one bad decision. It was about a culture that confused scale with strength, control with competence, and extraction with enterprise. Let me diagnose it for you. Strategic blunder. They diversified into banking without understanding risk management. They treated loans like tribute, expecting repayment because of who they were, not because of what they underwrote. Let me diagnose it for you. Strategic blunder. They diversified into banking without understanding risk management. They treated loans like tribute, expecting repayment because of who they were, not because of what they underwrote. Cultural rot. For 200 years, the company rewarded aggression over accountability. The men who seized territory were promoted. The men who asked questions were posted to fever swamps. By the end, no one inside the company could tell the truth without losing their position. Market blindness. They ignored the rise of industrial competition. While Manchester mills were flooding India with cheap cloth, the company was still trying to monopolize handloom trade. They fought the last war while the next one was already lost. Financial suicide. They borrowed against assets they didn't own. Indian tax revenue, princely debts, speculative land, and called it growth. When those assets collapsed, the company had no cushion, no plan B. No one had ever told them no. Leadership failure. The final directors, Sir John Lawrence, Sir Henry Bartle Frere, Lord Lawrence, were not businessmen. They were retired colonial administrators who had never run a profit and loss statement. They governed like they still had an empire to tax. But empires, as they discovered, do not appear on balance sheets. And here is the cascading effect, the domino chain that turned one mistake into total collapse. Mistake A, they lost their monopoly in 1813. Revenue crashed. They needed new income. Mistake B, they annexed Awadh in 1856 to steal its revenue. This triggered the 1857 rebellion. They lost their political power. Mistake C, stripped of government, they pivoted to banking in 1869. But banking requires trust, and 2 centuries of exploitation had destroyed their credibility. Loans defaulted. Mistake D, insolvent and irrelevant, they dissolved in 1874. Not with a battle, with a bureaucrat's pen. The final lesson they understood too late. You cannot extract forever. Eventually the soil goes dry, and when it does, the empire that fed on it starves first. Right now, someone is scaling on borrowed trust, VC money, hype, reputation, thinking the next round will save them. If that is you, hit the like button. Not for me. For the version of you that still thinks growth at all costs, is a business model. And subscribe, because the next part is where the ghost finally stops haunting, and where the lesson becomes yours to keep or lose. But before the end has one last surprise. The company died, but its playbook survived. In 1874, a clerk in London signs a document, and the most powerful corporation in human history ceases to exist. But here's the reveal that should haunt your sleep. No one noticed. The London Stock Exchange didn't halt trading. The newspapers buried the story on page 4. The 90 million people who once lived under the company's flag, they had already been transferred to the British Crown 16 years earlier. The dissolution was not a tragedy. It was an administrative afterthought. And that indifference is the true measure of the fall. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. Not 1874, 1857, the year the company lost its soul before it lost its charter. The Indian Rebellion erupts in May 1857. Sepoys, the company's own Indian soldiers, men who had fought and died for a corporate paycheck, mutiny across the Gangetic Plain. They massacre British officers at Meerut. They besiege Delhi. They declare Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, their leader. And here's the shock that broke the company's back. The rebellion was not led by enemies. It was led by employees, men who had served the company for decades, men who had watched their religion insulted, the Enfield rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat, sacred to Hindus and Muslims alike, men who had seen their pay cut while British officers' salaries doubled, men who had swallowed humiliation until humiliation became intolerable. The company crushes the rebellion, brutally, savagely, with British troops and Sikh mercenaries. By 1858, the mutiny is dead. An estimated 800,000 Indians are killed in the suppression. The Mughal dynasty ends. Bahadur Shah Zafar is exiled to Burma, where he dies in a prison cell, writing poetry in Urdu. But here is the mystery the company never solved. Why did the people they ruled, the people they civilized, choose death over their governance? The answer is not in the battle reports. It is in the tax ledgers, in the famine records, in the testimony of a single weaver from Manchester who told Parliament in 1842, "I have seen the Indian weaver at his loom, and I have seen him starve." The East India Company did not trade with India. They bled it. Between 1770 and 1900, 12 major famines sweep through company-controlled India. The worst in 1770 kills 10 million people in Bengal alone. 1/3 of the population. Gone. Not from drought. From policy. The company tripled land taxes to fund its shareholder dividends. It forced farmers to grow opium instead of rice. It destroyed local grain reserves to create artificial scarcity and drive up prices. And when the starvation began, the company's response was not relief. It was more extraction. A company official in Bihar writes in 1771, "The famine has been beneficial. It has reduced the population, and those who remain are more compliant." Read that again. Beneficial. A corporate officer called the death of 10 million people beneficial. And here's the surprise that history almost buried. The company didn't fall because it was cruel. It fell because it was cruel inefficiently. Every massacre required troops. Every famine required management. Every rebellion required suppression. And all of it, cost money that shareholders in London demanded as dividends, not defense. By 1860, the company's military expenses have consumed 60% of its revenue. Its administrative costs, running an empire it no longer legally owns, eat another 30%. That leaves 10% for debt service, pensions, and the delusion that it is still a viable enterprise. In 1867, the company sells its last major asset, the Assam tea plantations, to private British investors. The price is £1.2 million, less than 1 year's dividend at the company's peak. The buyers are former company officials who spent their careers learning where the real money was hidden. And here is the human story that numbers cannot capture. James Brown Ramsay, the Marquis of Dalhousie, the man who annexed Awadh and triggered the rebellion, dies in 1860, bankrupt and disgraced. His estate is sold to pay creditors. His portrait is removed from company headquarters. The man who gambled an empire on a single aggressive decision dies without a legacy. Sir John Lawrence, the final chairman who pivoted to banking, dies in 1879, 5 years after the company he tried to save. His obituary in the Times mentions his viceroyalty. It does not mention the East India Company, the institution that consumed his life, erased from his own death notice. And the employees, the clerks, soldiers, and administrators who served the company for generations, they received pensions for 3 years. Then the fund ran dry. Some emigrated to Australia, some died in workhouses. Some, the lucky ones, found jobs as clerks in the new British Indian government, doing exactly the same work for half the pay, and none of the delusion of grandeur. The final bankruptcy is not dramatic. In 1873, the company's auditors, Price, Waterhouse and Company, refused to certify the accounts. The books are so confused, they write, that no opinion can be formed as to the true financial position. Think about that. A company that collected taxes from 90 million people could not balance its own checkbook. Parliament acts with uncharacteristic speed. The East India Stock Dividend Redemption Act passes in June 1874. The company is dissolved. Its remaining assets, some railway shares, a few tea estates, a warehouse in Leadenhall Street, are liquidated. The proceeds, £2.7 million, are distributed to 2,700 shareholders. Each receives £1,000. In 1808, a single share had traded for £1,000. Now, the entire inheritance of an empire is worth 1 share at its peak. And here is the last lesson they learned. Too late, too quietly, too uselessly. An empire built on extraction collapses from indifference. Not the indifference of its enemies, the indifference of its owners. The shareholders who demanded dividends while millions starved. The directors who approved annexations while the books rotted. The clerks who processed famines as line items while families died in ditches. They didn't fall because they were attacked. They fell because they became forgettable. One is building something that treats people as line items. If that is you, hit the like button. Not for me. For the version of you that still thinks it's just business is a moral exemption. And subscribe, because the next part is where the ghost tries to speak from the grave, and where the lessons become weapons or warnings. But before the end asks one final question. If you build an empire and no one mourns its death, did you ever really rule? In 1874, the East India Company dies. But here's the reveal that history refuses to bury. It keeps trying to come back. In 1886, a group of former shareholders, men who inherited the stock from grandfathers who inherited it from great-grandfathers, petitioned the Crown to revive the charter. Their argument is absurd and honest. The name still carries weight in Asia. The brand is worth more than the bankruptcy. The Crown refuses, not because the name has no value, because the name has too much value, of the wrong kind. It is synonymous with exploitation, famine, and corporate tyranny. Reviving it would be not business. It would be provocation, but ghosts don't hear rejection. In 1907, a tea merchant in London registers the new East India Company as a trademark. He sells heritage blend tea in tins painted with elephants and palaces. The marketing promises the taste of empire. The reality is Ceylon tea mixed with food coloring and sold at triple the price. It fails within 2 years. Not because the tea is bad, because no one wants to taste empire anymore. In 2005, an Indian-born British entrepreneur named Sanjeev Mehta buys the rights to the East India Company name. His pitch is ironic and ambitious. We will rebrand it as a luxury goods company. We will sell the romance of trade, not the reality of conquest. He launches a line of heritage products, tea, biscuits, condiments, packaged in colonial-era designs. The website features sepia photographs of ships and saris. The tagline, trading since 1600. And here is the mystery that no marketing textbook can solve. Can you sell the aesthetic of empire without selling its memory? The answer so far is no. The new East India Company operates as a niche luxury brand with annual revenues estimated at under £5 million. It is not a revival. It is a museum gift shop. The empire that once shook the world is now a tin of overpriced tea on a shelf in Harrods. And that diminishment is the true final chapter. Current status. The East India Company exists today as a trademark owned by a private investor. It sells products. It has no employees in India. It has no ships. It has no army. It has no power. It is a name without a nation, a brand without a business, a ghost that forgot it was dead. Now, the lessons. The real reason you are still watching. Lesson 1. Never scale faster than your culture can sustain. The East India Company grew from 40 men in a warehouse to 260,000 soldiers ruling 90 million people in less than 150 years. But their culture, aggression over accountability, extraction over service, never evolved beyond the warehouse. Watch for this. If your team still acts like a startup but your revenue is enterprise level, you have a culture debt bomb. The people who got you to $1 million are not the people who can get you to $100 million. And if you don't hire for the next stage, you will collapse under the weight of the current one. Lesson 2. Monopoly is not a business model. It is a countdown. For 213 years, the company enjoyed a legal monopoly on trade with India. No competition. No pressure to innovate. No reason to treat customers well. And when Parliament finally broke that monopoly in 1813, the company had no competitive skills left. It was a fighter who had never been punched. Watch for this. If your only advantage is that no one else can enter your market, regulatory capture, exclusive contracts, patent walls, you are not building a business. You are building a prison cell with yourself inside. The moment the wall cracks, you will discover you never learned to fight. Lesson 3. Extraction feels like profit until the soil goes dry. The company extracted taxes, labor, resources, dignity for 2 centuries, and every extraction looked like revenue on the quarterly report. But extraction is not creation, it is mining. And mines collapse when the vein runs out. The company's vein, Indian tolerance, ran out in 1857. Watch for this. If your business model relies on pushing suppliers to bankruptcy, burning out employees, or deceiving customers, you are not profitable. You are predatory, and predators starve when the prey leaves. Lesson 4. The peak is where you stop looking down. At its height in 1800, the company controlled 1/5 of humanity, and not one director asked, what happens if this ends? They assumed permanence. They confused scale with stability. They believed their own legend, and legends don't prepare for winter. Watch for this. If your board meetings only discuss growth, and never discuss collapse scenarios, succession plans, or ethical boundaries, you are not planning. You are praying, and prayer is not a business strategy. The East India Company ruled more people than any empire in history, and it died because no one in the boardroom remembered that empires, like businesses, are built on trust, not terror. They forgot the customer. They forgot the employee. They forgot the human being behind every line item. And in the end, the line items were all that remained. This is not just a story, it is a lesson every new founder needs to hear before they make the same fatal mistakes. Smash that like button if this story just saved you from a mistake you didn't even know you were making. Share this with the person who is about to sign a lease, hire their first employee, or bet everything on a dream. And subscribe right now, because the next fallen giant is already making the same fatal error. We will expose it. We will break it down, and we will hand you the lesson before you pay the price. They built an empire on greed and lost it to blindness. Don't let history write your ending. Subscribe before your spreadsheet replaces your instinct.